Good morning, everyone. I welcome you all to another episode of Engineering with Shamil, and this is episode number 24. And today we are going to continue with the discussion of the emergency and exit lights. And this time in this video, we are going to discuss about the wiring and the power supply for the emergency and exit lighting. Okay, so without further ado, let us begin. So just to refresh our memory, we know what an emergency and exit light is. So an emergency or exit light is the one which will operate when the power failure occurs in a building. That is when the normal illumination lights, when the normal lights that provide the normal illumination, it actually fails to operate during a power failure, the emergency or the exit light will be operating during that time. So this is what the basic function of emergency or exit light is. So let us begin begin the explanation for the wiring and the power supply. So wiring and power supply. So the main point that we are going to discuss today in this video is how the emergency lights are electrically connected and how they are going to be powered. What is the power source for these emergency and exit lights? So we have actually briefly discussed in our previous videos, but in today's video we are going to discuss this in detail. Okay. So the goal of an emergency or exit light is that it is to ensure that there is an automatic switching taking place from the building power supply to the battery, and when the power is restored, then it will be actually going back to the building power supply, so that automatic switching will be taking place. So this is the main goal for the emergency and exit lighting when it comes to the power supply perspective. So and one more thing, when you're actually doing this in the normal operation, it is not during normal operation we have mentioned that the lights will be either off condition for the non-maintained emergency light, and for the maintained emergency light it will be during on condition. And during this normal period, if you notice, the LED indicator for that particular light will be actually glowing green. The indication for the what is it? It shows that the battery is also being charged. The battery which is there in the unit is actually being charged during that time. So that is the goal behind this. That is the what is status. That is the status for the operation of emergency and exit lights. Okay. Now, what are the key concepts involved in this discussion? So the first thing is that regarding the wiring and power supply, the first thing that we need to understand is the emergency and exit lights will be powered using 230 volts main supply. That is in the normal condition. It will be powered from the building power source itself. Okay, so it is using normal power source for charging purpose. The second aspect is that it auto transfers to the battery. So whenever there is a power failure in the building, the power supply will the power supply for the emergency light will be switching from the building mains to the battery which is installed in the emergency light. So that will be automatically happening. Automatically switching will be taking place. Then third aspect is that the circuit for the emergency light will be independently drawn from the distribution board. Okay, it is a separate circuit from the normal lighting. So that is the third aspect. The fourth aspect is it is centralized battery system. Now, what do you mean by centralized battery system? Centralized battery system, like I have mentioned in my previous videos, it is a system which is actually implemented in countries like UAE. So in that system, what happens is there will be a central power bank where all the batteries of all the emergency lights will be installed, and from there, it will be supplying to all the respective emergency lights. So this is actually used in large buildings, and it is for powering up multiple lights. So these are the four aspects. So we have discussed about the 230 volt main power supply, which is being used during normal condition. Then we have discussed about the auto transfer to the battery during the power failure situation, and then we have discussed about pulling a separate independent circuit for the emergency light. It will be separate from the normal lighting. And the last one is the central battery system, which will be powering up multiple lights, especially in case of the large buildings. Okay, so these are the key concepts which we have discussed. Now, what are the wiring requirements? So the first one is, like I have discussed in the previous slide, it is to pull a separate circuit dedicated for emergency lights. So the reason why we are pulling the dedicated separate circuit is that the normal faults which occurs in the lighting circuit should not affect the emergency lighting circuit. So this is why we are pulling a separate circuit for the emergency and exit lights. The second thing is that dedicated distribution board for emergency or exit light, or we can actually install, we can actually use dedicated circuit breaker which is located in the existing distribution board for the emergency and exit lights, the circuit. So this is the purpose of this one is to provide an easy isolation and maintenance. So whenever there's a maintenance issue or whenever there's a problem, we can actually easily isolate that circuit and then we can do our maintenance. And the third thing is that the emergency and lighting circuit, sorry, the emergency lighting and exit lighting circuit should be having a separate circuit, and that circuit should be pulled using fire rated cables. The reason is because these lights are actually meant to show the escape routes during an emergency situation like a fire. So if there is a fire, then these cables will be surviving during the fire, and the lights will keep on operating. Okay, so that is the reason why we need to have fire rated cables. Then we have the circuit monitoring. So the circuits will be monitored. The circuits will be monitored to ensure wiring integrity. This feature is actually available in the centralized battery system. Okay, then normally it is not there in the self-contained units, but it is there in the centralized battery system for monitoring the circuit integrity. So there are four wiring circuits for wiring requirements. So the first one is that it will be having a separate circuit. The second one is that it will be having a separate dedicated distribution board or a dedicated circuit breaker in an existing distribution board. And the third one is the cables, the circuit will be using fire rated cables. And the reason why we need to have fire rated cables, it is to survive the fire and keep the lights on. And the last one is that the circuit is actually being monitored to ensure wiring integrity. Okay, this particular requirement is there in the centralized battery system. Okay, so these are the wiring requirements. Now, what are the power supply options available? So there are two options. First one is self-contained. That is, if you go to the small buildings or medium-sized buildings, there you will see separate emergency and exit lights. So in each unit, each light will be having its individual battery. Okay, and it will not have any central panel. Each light fitting will be having its own battery. So the advantage of this one is that the pros is that it is simple. It is simple and there is no central control panel. But the disadvantage is that you have to maintain each light fitting individually. That is the only disadvantage for the self-contained lights. When it comes to centralized battery, the centralized battery is being used in the large buildings. Okay, so the initial installation cost will be high. That is, the initial upfront cost will be high. That is a disadvantage. But when it comes to the maintenance, you just need to maintain the power bank. You just need to maintain the power bank and the central panel. Okay, so you don't have to worry about the maintenance. But you don't have to worry about the maintenance. And also the backup will also be longer. Okay, the backup in the sense for the batteries the backup will be longer. So these two are the advantages of the centralized battery system. So we have discussed two. One is self-contained. Self-contained, you need to do maintenance for each and every light, whereas for centralized battery, maintenance is easy, but the upfront cost, that is installation upfront cost, will be higher. Okay, so these are two power supply options. Now, we have discussed this before in our previous slides, but again we are discussing the operation of the emergency and exit lights. So how does it work? And especially since our topic is about wiring and the power requirements, we will discuss it again so that it will be staying in our minds fresh. So first thing is that during normal power condition, the lights will be working upon 230 volts power supply, and the batteries inside these lights will be staying charged. Okay, so during this normal period, the batteries will be charged. Okay, so this is the normal power condition. The second thing is that the power failure. So during the power failure, the building main power supply will be cut off, and the power supply will be switched automatically to the battery, which is contained in the emergency light. Okay, or if it is a centralized battery system, it will be the centralized battery panel. So that's where all the connection will happen. So just to summarize, so to make it short, to make it simple for both the types, whenever power failure occurs, the power will be transferred from the main supply to the battery. Okay, and the lights will be illuminated using the battery power. Okay, so this is what happens during the power failure. The third one is when the power restores back, then the mains power supply will be returning, and the power supply for the emergency light will be switching back to the main supply. Okay, it will automatically switch back to the main supply, and the batteries will be recharged. So this is how the operation occurs. So we have discussed three parts. One is the normal condition. the power failure, and then power restoration. So these are three stages of how the three stages to explain, to show how the to show how the emergency and exit lights operate. Now, we have discussed the code requirements in the last slide. So we will just go through it again. So the first thing is that we are dealing with three codes over here. So the first code is the NFPA 101. So the NFPA 101 is the life safety code, which is released by the National Fire Protection Association. So it will give you the requirements, the clauses for the independent emergency lighting circuits. Then we have a code or a standard by the International Electrotechnical Commission, IEC. So the code number is 60598-2-22, and this set of standard will be giving the explanation about the requirements for the emergency equipment and the wiring related standards. Then we have the local standards. So these local standards could be belonging to that particular region. For example, since I am from Qatar, so we have a separate set of clauses for the emergency lighting, that code is being released by the Qatar Civil Defense Department. Okay, so in that we mentioned about the fire router cables, separate circuits, and all. Okay, so this is about the code requirements when it comes to the wiring and power requirements for the emergency and exit lights. So to summarize, so the emergency and exit light must be independent, it should be fire rated, and it should be automatic. So the reason why we have a separate circuit is that it is to ensure reliability for the emergency lighting circuit. The auto transfer aspect is to automatically switch to the battery supply, so that we will get an instantaneous response. Then we have the fire rated cables. So the fire rated cables is to ensure that the emergency lights operate during the time of fire, and the battery backup is to ensure that the emergency lights or the exit lights will be working during the power failure time when the mains fail. So lights should always work when needed. That is a main concern when it comes to the emergency and exit lights. So with this, I conclude my topic. I conclude the video on the wiring and the power requirements for the emergency and exit lights. Thank you for listening. And in case if you have any queries, comments, feedback, or doubts regarding this particular topic, kindly do post them in the comment section, and I will be happily obliged to respond to each and every query of yours. Thank you once again. And before I sign off, I would request all of you to kindly like, share, and subscribe to my YouTube channel, Engineering with Shamil, so that it will motivate me to produce more content regarding the engineering videos. Thank you once again, and I will actually sign off. I'm wishing all of you a good day ahead. Thank you.